One of the things that I think I am very good at is bullying people into being better versions of themselves and quickly. That's one of the most powerful things you can do, whether it is creating a piece of content or even better, speaking at a live event, is at the end of your talk, if someone isn't moved to make an actual choice or take a real action, then what were we here for? I went to go teach at a middle school, and some kid came up to me and he said it during class in front of everybody. He said, "Wait, if you're a millionaire, then why do you drive a Hyundai Sonata?" And he was like 12, right? And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he's "Why aren't you driving a Tesla?" And I was like, that's so interesting that a 12-year-old is already thinking that millionaires are supposed to drive Teslas.
Welcome to Catching Up to Fi, a podcast on mindset, money, and life for late starters of any age on their journey to financial independence. I'm Bill, and I'm a late starter.
I'm Jackie, and I'm also a late starter, and we're your host. We're here to help you on your journey to financial independence, no matter where you're starting.
We're going to talk to experts, other late starters, and explore topics related to our mission.
Join us as we catch up to Fi together.
Hello and welcome back to Catching Up to Fi. It's been a while. We're excited about today's conversation. It comes on the heels of a Plutus Impact conference. But Jackie, what is the point today? What is our hook? Why do people need to listen to this?
Oh my gosh, have we got a ball of energy for you today? We are very excited to have her with us today, but we're talking to a kick-ass woman who turned $300,000 of debt into $2 million in net worth in just 3 years. It sounds impossible, but today we are stepping through exactly how she did it and how she's helping others crush it too.
Yeah, I'm so excited. Today's guest, Bernadette Joy, is a literal force of nature. She's a first-generation Filipino American powerhouse, a former corporate gal, and the author of the recent hit book, Crush Your Money Goals, which Oprah Daily named one of the best books for personal growth, not just money. But don't let her business degrees fool you. She is far from a snooty finance chick. When she isn't taking the stage at a TEDx or NASDAQ, she's sharpening her timing in stand-up comedy and improv, vibing to K-pop, or inspiring creators with get-in-your-face style accountability at the recent Plutus Impact Summit. She now maintains a multimillion-dollar portfolio while working less than 20 hours a week, and she's here to show us that financial freedom isn't about restriction. It's really about peace. Please welcome the money magician herself, Bernadette Joy.
Hello, money magician. I love that. That was the best introduction I've heard. I'm like, who is this person? That she sounds pretty fun. So thank you.
We are feeding off of your energy. We were both so excited. We're like, this is going to be a fun recording. We're going to love this. And so is our audience.
Let's talk about recent history because we're still coming down from an event you put together in a matter of months where we were honored, Jackie and I, with Plutus Impact Awards. But that's not what we want to talk about. We want to talk about the energy, purpose, meaning, goals, and the successes of the Plutus Impact Summit. How did that come about, and what was your point?
Oh, well, thank you. And I'm so grateful that both of you were there. You contributed to that energy so much. So last year from today, I went to speak at an event in Philadelphia. And I was lucky enough that Harlan Landis, who is a founder of Plutus Foundation, he came to my event. And afterwards, he said, I would love for us to talk about potentially collaborating. And so we went to an Asian bakery with his daughter and his very pregnant wife and my husband. And at that bakery, we started to just lay out what could become the Plutus Impact Summit. And fast forward to May, that ended up happening the way that you described. And it really came about because both of us realized that though we have been in the personal finance space and that we've created content, we were both very interested in the next iteration of what content could look like in money talks because of AI, because of the boom in just all sorts of different types of investing. And we realized that there was a gap in the in-person community for personal finance where people were talking about deeper level topics, and also where we could have a space where people can have very different views and still be friends at the end of it, which I feel like is very rare nowadays to be able to say, I don't agree with you on X, Y, and Z, but we can still be cool. So that's really the event that we wanted to put together. And it's been such a journey. And I will say it was probably one of the highlights of my career to be able to lead a conference in that regard. And we're hoping that we get to do something like that again in the future.
And Bernadette, for people that may not be familiar with Plutus, we talk about it sometimes on the show, but Plutus focuses on independent financial content creators. So we're talking podcasters, bloggers, YouTubers, and all of that. Not just how to grow your business, but how to be leaders in the space.
Yes. So one of the discussions that Harlan and I had where we wanted to differentiate from other in-person events is that we really wanted to target people who we thought were thought leaders and up and coming in the space. So there seems to be this big divide, in my opinion, of like, you got the Ramit Sethi's, right, and the Susie Ormans of the world, and you've got these content creators that maybe are just breaking into that space. And we wanted to focus on the people who've been in the space for a long time and who've been contributing in a way that we felt was full of integrity and real intention towards their audience, not just trying to get brand deals, not just trying to make a name for themselves, but actually really serving the community. And you two are such great examples of that. That's why you were awarded an award for the 15th annual Plutus Awards. And so I think Harlan can probably speak more to this, but there is definitely a transition happening within Plutus Foundation. And I think the personal finance community, again, as a whole, because of the rise of AI and all of these gurus who are telling you what you should be doing, even though they might not be transparent with what their actual finances look like. And so we really were intentional about saying, we're going to have a smaller event on purpose, and we're really going to focus on people who want to be in this for the long term and who want to be in it with their communities in a way that is mutually beneficial, not just, hey, I'm on a platform and you guys are my audience.
What was interesting to me is you also added an element to this conference that doesn't exist in really any other conference. You created a sort of a speakers forum in the month or two leading up to this conference, because not only did you want to address sort of the logical left brain stuff, but you wanted people to exercise their right brains and use their voices, folks that wanted to exercise public speaking in their platforms, which is really a face-to-face impact-oriented thing. And I participated in that. And I was very nervous. Public speaking is one of my goals for this year, because I think you can get a message across face-to-face in front of an audience that has the chance of really impacting change as opposed to virtual or remote or pure content absorption ways. And I really got the sense that it did that. You had, 12, 16 people go through this. We were all very committed. You were very good at educating us because you are a fantastic public speaker in your own right. And one of the reasons that is because you've challenged yourself with things like stand-up comedy and improv, and you even brought that to the conference. And I am now motivated to take an improv class, something that is way out of my comfort zone. But getting out of your comfort zone leads to growth. Tell us a little bit about that component and why you incorporated these elements of comedy and improv.
Oh my gosh. So Plutus Voices was something that was happening in years prior, but I came to Harlan and said, I would really love to help elevate the next generation of thought leaders, because it's one thing to be on edited YouTube video or on TikTok or whatever, where everything is so heavily scripted or edited, versus what is it really like to engage people in real life? I think that's where real thought leadership can play out. And so I had already been teaching paid speaking, which I tell people is different from public speaking, right? Public speaking is just like going out there and you doing free gigs, but you really can prove that you're showing a level of value if people are willing to pay you to come and speak, especially when we know there's so many people who are willing to speak for free. So I wanted to offer an opportunity for the next generation of personal finance leaders to learn how to be a paid speaker. And yes, there was 13 of you. It was so fun. I was telling my husband during that month, after every meeting that we had, y'all were so committed. It was Tuesday, Thursdays from 12 to 1:30 Eastern time. And everyone who was super busy made time for it. You actually spoiled me, because when you said you changed your schedule being an ER doctor, I was like, ain't nobody got an excuse in this group to miss. He literally is the one guy who has a life or death job. So you guys give me a reason why you can't show up for class, right? And so a big part of that commitment, I think, was removing some of the barriers and excuses that we often have as to why we can't invest into our own personal development. And I don't have children. So I told my husband afterwards, I was like, is this what it feels like to have kids when you just see them all go on stage and they all just do such a great job and you're just so proud of them? And I really felt that because I'm sure you saw it, Bill, like some of the evolutions of some of the folks from the beginning, and it was just a month that we were together in person. I gave you some homework before that, but just how much people improved in that 1 month to do what was, in my opinion, a harder talk, which is a 5-minute talk versus doing a 10, 20, 45-minute talk. Everyone did a really great job on that. And the reason I brought in improv and comedy was because earlier in my speaking career, the two things that came up most often as a theme of why people like me as a speaker is what they said, that I had high energy and that I was funny. And I wasn't trying to be funny. And so it's like, what would happen if I purposefully tried to be funny? What would that look like? And so I started taking improv and comedy classes a couple of years ago. And I will say that for as long as I've been doing keynote speaking, doing a clean 5-minute stand-up set was 100 times harder. And that really helped me in not only paid speaking, but also even in my coaching classes, in my one-on-ones, with just learning how to use economy of words. And I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I highly recommend anyone who's listening to this, even if you're not in personal finance, anyone I think would benefit from doing one stand-up set in their life, because it was probably the most terrifying thing I've ever had to do.
Oh gosh, there's our challenge, Bill. There's our challenge. Now, we definitely want to get to your money story, but before we do that, I got one more question about speaking. So obviously when COVID happened, there was no in-person speaking. Bill and I both met at our last in-person event right before COVID. And after COVID, everything was online. Everything was Zoom. Now, 5 years later, people are starting to come back. You're talking about a lot of in-person keynoting and different events in person. Are you seeing changes from when it was before COVID to after? Are people willing to come back and enthusiastic about doing the in-person stuff like they did before?
What a great question. I would say I was in learning and development for a decade within my kind of corporate career before I went out to be an entrepreneur and a speaker. And back then, I would say it was a lot more palatable to go to events and expect a boring speaker and expect someone's just going to be reading from slides or whatever it is. I would say nowadays, I think it is actually more difficult, even though I think people are craving the in-person connection. I've found it more difficult to get people to come to in-person events because the trade-off is leaving your very comfy couch and watching the same person on YouTube versus seeing them, traveling, paying for a flight, paying for a hotel, taking time off of work, all of those things. I think part of the reason that the summit turned out really well was because the people who were there were very motivated to be there in person, and the price of the tickets were not cheap as well. And I've been applying this to my other love in life, which is K-pop music. And right now, the biggest band in the world, BTS, has been traveling. And I've been hosting in-person events for that as well. And what I found is that after every event, people have said the same thing to me, is that they felt they enjoyed it because they felt seen and they felt they found community in there, but it had to be very intentional and facilitated. So I think the old events of just show up and randomly network and hope that you run into someone is a very hard sell. But I've been very candid with people to say, if you're coming, we're going to put you into a mastermind. We're going to teach you these specific skills. We're going to make sure that you have access to the speakers. They're not just going to run away and you're never going to see them again. And even with my K-pop events, I am very intentional about putting people into smaller groups and giving them specific prompts to talk about. You guys experienced that as well at Plutus Summit. And I think nowadays the events have to be a lot more intentional, and people are willing to come if they see there's more of a structure, and not structure in the way that it's going to be boring and stuffy, but structure knowing that there is a real intention for them coming. So I think it's very different from that perspective. But I hear from a lot of folks, and maybe you guys have heard this too, I don't think free events are the way to go anymore, because I've seen it. I've seen other people say they put out an event and 100 people RSVP and 40 people show up. There's a lot of differences. I could probably go on all day about this question because now you have me thinking about it.
The last thing I want to say about this too is, yes, the 5 minutes was very hard and I went 7 minutes, but I cut it down from probably 15 to 20.
15 minutes before, yeah.
The way you structured it was really cool. It's like, ask a powerful question. What do we want to answer here? Give 2 or 3 points that lead up to it. And then what was really important was ask your audience to take immediate action. It's not just, go home, think about it. My point was savings rate is your power tool. Take out your phones today and increase your savings rate 1% to 2%. You have actually had people pay off their cars at the end of your speeches, right?
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I think I am very good at is bullying people into being better versions of themselves and quickly. That's one of the most powerful things you can do, whether it is creating a piece of content or even better, speaking at a live event, is at the end of your talk, if someone isn't moved to make an actual choice or take a real action, then what were we here for? And I think that's also one of the big differences to Jackie's question of what's different. If I'm being honest, the days of motivational speaking, I think, are numbered, if not already done. People want real action. People are tired. People are exhausted. They have to work 2 jobs now. They are feeling late on their retirement savings. So inspiration is great, but inspiration plus implementation is what I think is really going to power people into the next chapters of their lives.
Wow.
Well, talking about implementation, okay, you are, is it master or mistress of this? I don't know.
I like master.
In the opening, I said that you had $300,000 worth of debt. And you not only paid that off, but you got to a net worth of $2 million, and you did that in 3 years. So you talked a little bit about your career. So why don't we talk about getting out of college? What was the debt? Where did it come from? And then take us through how you were able to make this transition in such a short period of time. We want to know.
Sure. So to clarify, I paid off $300,000 of debt in 3 years and got to my first million. And it took me another couple of years to get to my next million. But going back to the beginning, 2016, I just graduated from my MBA program. I thought the MBA was going to be the magic bullet that by the end of this program, I'm going to know exactly who I want to be when I grow up, and I'm going to have the 6-figure job. And I ended up graduating from that program with $72,000 of debt and still no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up. I actually had a business idea for a company that was called Dress, which back in the day, if you remember pre-COVID, there was Rent the Runway and a lot of these different clothing companies that you could rent clothes from for special occasions. So during my MBA program, I was a bridesmaid several times for my best friends. And any woman who's gone through this period where all your friends are getting married and you have to go to the bridal shower and the bachelorette party and pay for bridesmaid dress and all this stuff. And I was like, ladies, I am broke. I have $72,000 of student loans. I can't pay for all these dresses. So I had this idea to start an in-person boutique where you could rent dresses from instead of just ordering them online. And that was actually what motivated me to take a shot into entrepreneurship. But the challenge with going into entrepreneurship was that I'm very risk averse. And so the thought of starting a business and having $72,000 of student loans, and anyone who started a business knows that you're not just going to rocket into revenue your first couple of years in business. I decided I needed to have a really solid plan to pay off these $72,000 of student loans. So I resolved to pay them off in 2 years, which was already insane because most people take a decade to pay off their student loans. But me being stereotypically Asian and good at math, I was like, let me see, $72,000 of student loans divided by 2 years is about $36,000 a year. That is a lot of money to just throw at student loans. If I keep breaking it down, $36,000 divided by 12 months is about $3,000 a month, which is about $100 a day. And so I had to say to myself, Bernadette, are you smart enough to figure out how to make an extra $100 a day and just put that towards your student loans? And so that's what I did. For the first couple of months, I didn't know any major strategies. I was starting to listen to podcasts and read books and stuff, but I just started implementing almost immediately. If I make $100 today, then I'm going to put it towards my student loans. If I figure out a way to save $100 a day, I'm going to put it towards my student loans. And I wish I had the activity log from my student loan account, because you would see all these random transactions where I was paying off like, oh, I decided to not get Starbucks today, so I'm going to put the $7 I would have put towards the Starbucks and put it towards my student loans anyway. And so you'd see all these little transactions going towards my student loans. And I actually made a pretty good dent where my student loans were a collection, as many people's student loans are, of a bunch of little loans. And I was able to pay off the first $5,000 loan doing this debt snowball just by doing those little actions every day. And then once I started maxing out on all those things, then I looked at, okay, how do I start making more money? And that's where I started to grow that business. And luckily for me, during that time, you guys have both met AJ. You've noticed that AJ is the really chill person in this marriage, where he was very much on board with the two of us working on our finances together. So that was obviously a huge part of it. And the two of us started to figure out, how can we accelerate from just $100 a day to making kind of other choices to accelerate the timeline. And long story short, we ended up paying up those student loans. I graduated in April and they were paid off by November of the same year. So when I think about that time, and we'll probably talk more about it later, where I was straight up hustling back then. And that's something that a lot of people don't want to hear. They want to hear the kind of the easy way out of getting out of debt or growing a business. But that truncated time in the early part of my journey was very much about every day waking up and just saying, what can I do today that will make a little contribution to it? Some days I didn't make any money. Some days I went backwards and ended up buying something I wasn't supposed to buy or whatever. But then the next day I wouldn't give up. I would just say, okay, today's a new day. Let me start over again.
Yeah, and people are going to want to know, what kind of income were the two of you making in your household that got you there? It wasn't enormous either, right?
No. At the time, AJ was working at a utility here in North Carolina, and he was making, I think, $80K then. And then I had just left my MBA program, so I wasn't making much at the time. I took kind of a side gig as an executive recruiter, so a headhunter. I would go place people at jobs, and that was purely commission. My base salary, which was actually a draw, meaning they would pay me a paycheck, but I would have to owe it back if I didn't make those placements, was $30K at the time.
So what else made up that $300,000 worth of debt? You said $72,000 in the student loan. What was the rest?
Yeah. So kind of like the usuals, we had a lease, we had credit card bills, and then not only had one mortgage, but we actually had a second mortgage on a rental property that we had no business owning at the time. I don't know who approved us for that loan. Actually, I do know. At the time, Fixer Upper and HGTV was having its moment. And so I was like, I could be Joanna Gaines. We could be Chip and Joanna, and we could rent out places and stuff. And so we had a rental property that turned out to be a nightmare. Actually. And so we had a lot of bills. For example, the tenant there went in there one day and there was just mold on the ceiling, and we didn't know for how long that had been happening. And so we had to rip out the whole bathroom, stuff like that. What I would say was really interesting during that time was that the mentality back then that we really had to switch over was that my husband at the time was saying, all our friends also have these kind of bills. And you just got your MBA. I'm sure you're going to get a new job. I'm sure you're going to be making more money. So what's the big deal? Though the pressure that I felt back then, because in the back of my mind, I knew I didn't really want to go back to corporate. I didn't want to go work for someone else. Felt like it was more urgent than probably most people might have felt if they just were like, this is what everyone else has, so I'm okay.
Yeah, interesting here to me is that you got your snowball going, and it sounds like you didn't necessarily save at that time because you wanted to get the debt paid off, and then you transitioned all that you were paying on debt into investing, and then that snowballed into a savings snowball, and then it just built from there. You had to tighten your belts, grow your income, increase the gap like we recommend to all of our audience. Supposedly, you even had a debt-free scream at some point there, and you told your story on Good Morning America, which is also fantastic. I also want to talk a little bit about your first generation Filipino American. That is very important to you. It's critical in this journey because you're kind of a unicorn in this space, just like Jackie in a way. And that's a big part of this journey for you and your husband. There may be money scripts and history involved here. And then you're also very passionate about women of color becoming financially independent and empowered. First, let's look at the money scripts and how did that transition to your motivation to help, in particular, women of color?
Yes, I will say I'm very explicit with people that I am first generation Filipino American. My parents immigrated from the Philippines. Also, my father had 7 kids from his first marriage and 2 kids from his second marriage, and I'm the 8th. There's no inheritances to be had. When my father passed away 5 years ago, he left nothing. My father and his next brother, so my father was the oldest of 9, and him and my Tito Dante, Tito is how you say uncle in Filipino, they had moved to the US and they were always deemed the most successful because they moved to the US. Like my uncle ended up growing a great tax accounting business. My father worked his way up to eventually becoming a CFO at a company. They made good money, but my father had 9 kids, right? And so one of the things that I learned from my uncle when my dad passed away was that when my father went to college, he then paid for my uncle's college. And then my uncle paid for the next sibling's college. And then the next one paid for the next college. And because my grandparents were both farmers and did not go to college. So one of the things that has been very important, and mind you, by the end of the 9 siblings, all 9 siblings had gone to college. And my father took that same mentality and put all his kids through college. I remember actually coming out of undergrad without any student loans because my dad figured out a way to pay for that on top of all the other expenses he had. And so I share that with you in the sense of oftentimes nowadays, especially because I've been on Good Morning America, I've been on some of these outlets, people will say, oh, it must be nice. You must live a very privileged life. It must be easy for you because now you're a millionaire. And I'm like, to a certain extent, of course, we'll take credit for my own achievements, but obviously that wouldn't have happened if my father didn't make these really big leaping moves to move from the Philippines to the US, to start from the bottom up, to pay for all of these things. And the reason I share that with you is because so many of us, especially women of color, those of us who end up being like successful or being the poster child for these things, a lot of people will make certain assumptions about how we got there. I think there's also a fine line, and I've only learned this recently, between me saying, oh, I did this all on my own versus really realizing what are the other things that had to happen for me to be able to do that. So there is a certain privilege that I've had of, yeah, I happen to have a really intelligent father who decided he wanted to prioritize education. He didn't leave anything for himself, but he made sure that I went to college. And I think that one of the things that is coming up for me right now is there's been a lot of conversation in the past and things that I've even said in the past about, oh, the patriarchy and oh, the systems, and those are all true. But it also can be true that even as a woman of color, that there are other things that when I look back on my family history that I have to be more grateful about, that I don't think I was until now I'm in this position. So I'm saying all that because it's very complex. It's been very layered, and healing the money wounds from a lot of past things when it comes to family and heritage and culture has been things that I'm working through right now.
Yeah, thank you so much for acknowledging that, Bernadette. Interesting about how even though they had 9 kids, they believed in the education, and you got a huge benefit from that all the way to the point where you went to business school. So I can appreciate that. I was a first generation college grad and it was a little bit different, but I keep thinking about the future generation and a lot of our late starters, even if we're starting late, we still got future generations that could benefit from us doing the right thing. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and with regards to the women of color and financial empowerment, you have a unique view because you're calling out women in a way. Women need a voice and they deserve a voice, but you have a specific criteria in order to earn that voice. Can you tell us about how you feel about this?
You're the first person who's asked me about this on a podcast. I love this. Where do I start with this? I will say that I'm 41. I'm a millennial, so got engrossed in the boss babe, like we're so independent. But I noticed particularly in personal finance and then with other people who have been wanting to learn about how I grew my business, there was a lot of talk in these rooms of we are either owed this or the patriarchy is against us. And again, those things can be true. And also, ladies, did we do everything that we could in our power to ensure that we are capable of our own independence? Actually, a year or two ago, I started getting really frustrated going to a lot of women's empowerment conferences where 80% of the talk was about imposter syndrome. And, oh, like, how do we get over and believe in ourselves or whatever? And because I used to work for Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, and I would go to also tech conferences where it's mostly men. You go to a conference that's just for tech or whatever, that's not women focused, there is zero talk about imposter syndrome. People are just talking about whatever it is that needs to be done to become wealthy. And so I started venturing down this path of what would happen if we just assumed that we are all capable and we spent less time rah-rahing and more time actually executing on the things that we need to execute on. I felt very weird doing that because on social media and stuff, that wasn't the popular message back then. For example, in the personal finance space, like it was very popular to just crap on Dave Ramsey because this, that, right? And I agree that some of the things that he says I don't like, but the truth is he has helped a lot of other people get out of debt or whatever. And so instead of focusing on how he's saying or what he's saying, I chose to pick on the one or two things that he talked about that I was like, okay, that resonates with me and I'm just going to go do that instead of spending more time just talking about all the things I don't like about what he says, right? I felt like there's a lot of wasted energy just talking about all the things that are not working for us instead of focusing on the handful of things that are in our control and that what we can do. And so I went with that message, but I wasn't as candid about it, if I'm being honest, online as I was with my coaching clients, because I knew that coaching clients, they're with me for the long term. They're not going to take my things out of context. They knew that when I was yelling at them, it was out of love. And it's been interesting. That has been my MO for the last 10 years. But people like you, for example, at the Plutus Summit have only seen that more recently because I've been more vocal about it on speaking stages or on podcast interviews where it used to be very, very contained to just my actual coaching community. And so I'm really grateful that you asked that and that you brought that out because for a long time I thought, oh, am I being too tough on people or am I being insensitive? And I realized that now, just like everything else, not every podcast is for everyone. My messaging is not for everyone too, but the people who do tend to gravitate towards my messaging of, yes, we can agree that there are systemic issues that are at play here. And you did not need to buy that thing on Amazon today, right? Those two things can be true. And the people who seem to take really well to my coaching are the ones who are willing to be open to that feedback and realize that a lot of their financial independence is more so on their behavior than focusing on all the things that are working against them.
See, that's where your improv skills have come in. Okay, that's true. And
yeah, there was the yes and. I heard the yes and.
Bernadette, you're so right that you have a unique perspective. You approach things a little different, and it's not what you typically see. So I'm wondering, it sounds like that business model has worked really well for you. Was that the turning point, getting rid of all the debt to being financially well and getting to that $1 million net worth? Was it mainly your business that helped you do that? You sort of went off the path of your MBA and you said, you know what, here's what I'm good at. Here's where I'm different. And here's where I think I can make my money. Was that the thing that did it?
If you had asked me this question a month ago, I actually think my answer would have been very different, but the Plutus Summit helped me clarify that even for myself. My business, I actually just looked at the revenue of it right before this call. And in the 10 years since I've been an entrepreneur, but really I started Crush Your Money Goals in 2020, I've made about $1.2 million in this business. But I think the unique thing was that I kept it.
That's the biggest part, right?
I kept it. And so there's so many business coaches that will tell you how to make revenue, but there's not many business coaches that also tell you how to keep it, invest it, and grow the difference. The primary driver, I think, to your point is, yes, I had a business that I was able to generate that kind of revenue, but I then didn't blow it on buying a bigger house and I didn't get a nicer car. I kept a very similar lifestyle. My lifestyle is actually not that much different from when I was $300,000 in debt. So that was a part of it. But then investing was kind of like third leg of that. So first leg being the business, second leg being avoiding lifestyle creep. But the third thing was that I actually did a lot of things that were opposite to what the general personal finance community was telling me to do on investing. And I'm not saying that everyone should do what I did. But for example, when I was paying off that $300,000 of debt, I completely stopped my 401k contributions. My husband also stopped doing his 401k contributions, and we got so much crap for that. But I intuitively knew for myself personally that I was not able to juggle multiple financial priorities at once. And so I chose to pause on those 401k contributions. And when you said turning point, the turning point for me on the business happened, I remember it very specifically. Adam, who was actually also at the summit, who has then become a great advocate for me. He used to be my editor at several other publications. He was hosting a panel discussion, and it was me. It was this guy who was the face of Bankrate and some other person. I don't remember who the other person was. And me and the guy from Bankrate got into a fight on this panel discussion because I said what I did was that I paused my 401k contributions and I decided to pay off my student loans. And I also decided to eventually pay off my house in full instead of what everyone else tells you to do. Keep your 401k contributions or whatever and do a little bit of investing over time. You don't have to pay off your house because interest rate, blah, 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 blah. I did the opposite. And I got into an argument about it. And he said, well, why would you even need a paid off home? And I was like, because my parents didn't have a paid off home. They ended up losing their home and they ended up having to relocate to a completely different city. And that will be an emotional money wound that I will forever carry. And so me knowing that I have a paid off home helped me grow my business because I didn't have to worry about whether or not I could pay the mortgage or not. And so that was a turning point for me because I realized there are so many different ways to wealth and I can just share what I've done for wealth. I'm not telling people that you have to do it my way, but I like showing people here's what could happen if you do it. And for me, it happened to work out.
Yeah, I mean, this is fantastic because there's many roads to Rome and we do us or you do you. And unabashedly, fine, you do you and I'm going to do it my way because I have these money scripts that sort of dictate how I feel about the process that I'm in. You are kindly confrontational is the way I would say it.
Thank you. My husband would say otherwise, but thank you.
You challenge women to be the lead characters in their own financial story. You want to remove systemic barriers, but you also challenge them to be the lender and not the borrower and to flip the script. One of the other challenges you have is you said in one article that financial literacy is dead, and you got a lot of shit for that. You have shifted from teaching financial literacy to fluency and freedom. So why have you inverted this, and why do you think financial literacy is dead?
If financial literacy was working, then why are we in the state that we're in? That's basically what I've come to the conclusion on. And then specifically in North Carolina, where I was living up until recently. So Charlotte is the second biggest banking city after New York in the US. And all of the financial literacy programs that I could find in North Carolina were financed by big banks that were basically just trying to groom their next customers. I was not down for that. And for example, as a juxtaposition to that, I would teach financial classes for middle school girls. That's like my favorite target audience is like the kind of 11 to 13-year-olds because they know what's going on and they're very vocal. And I would go to these classes and I would tell them, I would be honest, I say, I'm a millionaire. I was bullied in middle school. I was not cool at all back then. And there are plenty of ways to make money and to start early. And I would tell these girls like, oh, I'm 40 something and I'm retired. And I would get these amazing comments from these girls being like, you're retired? The only people I know retired are so old. And they're like, and you go to see Cat's Eye, these cool concerts and stuff. I want to do that. And the reason I say that financial literacy is dead is not only the fact that I don't think it's actually been effective. I think it's also been a guise to actually further the capitalistic kind of wheel that people are being put into, like the rat race. They're like, oh, financial literacy means that you can get a mortgage instead of teaching how do you go one step further and teach people how to have a paid off home. Like, why are we not teaching people that? And then my biggest kind of thing that really threw me for a loop on that locally was just like how much emphasis there was on credit versus investing and saving. Like, why are we teaching these kids that the only way you can buy a house is to have a credit score? Or the only way that you can own a car is to have a good credit? Like, why are we not just teaching kids, maybe you don't need a fancy car, maybe you try to buy a car in cash? My favorite thing, I know I'm going on a tangent here, I went to go teach at a middle school and some kid came up to me and he said it during class in front of everybody. He said, wait, if you're a millionaire, then why do you drive a Hyundai Sonata? And he was like 12, right? And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, why aren't you driving a Tesla? And I was like, that's so interesting that a 12-year-old is already thinking that millionaires are supposed to drive Teslas. What is the socialization that we're telling these kids? And then I made the mistake of said, I don't drive a Tesla because I don't like Elon Musk. And they said, why don't you like Elon Musk? And then I was like, okay, we're going to be here for a while, kids. Why we don't like Elon Musk.
Yeah, the setup, right? So now I see exactly what you mean by saying it's almost like what we define as financial literacy. And you're so right. Like a lot of the programs, is there some type of conflict for who's sponsoring those or whatever? So independent people like you and I love to go to high schools. And you're right. I love to teach about the investing part, compound growth, entrepreneurship. Those are the things that need to be a part of it. So we got to be doing something here. We got to change that. You're right. We got to talk about things like the credit and stuff like that, but that's not the only thing. And there does seem to be a little bit of an overemphasis. So, we can cover that, but man, what's next? What's next?
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about for me is skills-based learning, getting out of the theory of it, because you also say we treat people like numbers and not like humans, which I think is really important. And you got to flip the script and say, this is a skill you want to learn, and these are the numbers that get you to the skill. And then these are the values that you should consider, like paying off a house or buying a car with cash that's used, and not being brainwashed by our consumer society that millionaires drive expensive cars, own expensive houses, live in expensive neighborhoods. So I really like how you flip the script. Now let's move towards your book, because we want to get to the H in crush. And that's what we really want to talk about for our late starters. But take us through the first 4 letters in crush, because you love having acronyms for these things. And this acronym's evolved, but your crush methodology has changed people's lives, especially women's lives, and empowering them to take action and make change. Now, let's go through the C, the R, the U, the S real quickly, and then focus on the H.
Sure. Crush is in the order that it's meant to be. Often when people mess up on this is because they go out of order. So C stands for curate your accounts. And so that's simply saying like you need to declutter and organize your finances. So when I work with people, often the reason that they are feeling financially unstable is because they don't even know how much money they have and they don't know where it is. And so common examples of that is I have clients who have 8 credit cards. It's why do you need 8 credit cards? Or I have a checking account and a savings account that earns 0%. So just cleaning up the accounts and making sure they are the most optimized. Then R is reverse into independence. And so to piggyback off of the difference between financial literacy and what I teach, which is financial freedom, I think financial literacy teaches people how to get a job. And I think financial freedom teaches people how to live their dreams. And so reversing into independence is going through the different exercises of if money were no issue, what would you actually be doing with your life? And being clear on what that could be. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be like the thing, the passion, but having a passion in life outside of working. I tend to find those people are the ones who actually make some serious progress on their independence goals, because if you can't imagine life outside of working, then why would you bother to change any of your behavior? So reverse into independence is what would you be doing if money were no issue? What are the dreams that you have? And then working backwards from what would actually financially need to happen to make those things come true.
Yeah, I mean, I want to take a quick pause here because you had a really significant experience in life that sort of helped you take stock of the value of time and present moment, because there's a story you told at the Impact Summit with regards to actually reversing your goals and creating joy goals and a retirement number because a friend of yours passed away. Tell us that story, if you would, as why it's so important to reverse your goals, because you don't own tomorrow. It's not guaranteed, right?
Yeah. So her name is Trish. She actually was someone who had hired me to be a speaker at her conference back-to-back years, which is pretty rare. And we got to know each other really well. And she said to me, Bernadette, I want to become a client of yours. I want to actually take this conference and grow it into my own business one day. But always the but I have to wait for things to like perfectly align. I have to wait for the right time to leave my job that I've been there for decades. I have to wait for my daughter to be ready for going to college. I have to wait for my in-laws to get better, all this other stuff. And I remember that last conversation with her. I said, okay, I'll come back to you in a couple of months and you'll let me know that you're ready by then, because I'm going to bully you to doing this. She said, okay. She said, just wait for me. I'll be ready in a year. And then a couple weeks later, I get a call from her coworker saying that her and her husband were hit by a drunk driver on the highway, and they were in their 50s, still very young, still had a lot of life to live. And it was actually a couple of weeks before FinCon. And I was slated to host FinCon that year. And so the one person who actually knew her as well is Erica Young, if Erica. And so I call Erica and Erica's, yeah, I just heard you. And we're just like crying, crying. And we're just both saying, what are we even doing? Why does any of this even matter right now? We just saw her. We were just hugging her a couple of weeks ago at this conference, and now she's gone. And one of the things that really even hurt the most about her passing away was that she was really obsessed with the book Let Them by Mel Robbins, which I was like, that book is okay. The Oprah list that you mentioned, Mel Robbins is on that list, and so am I. And I was like, I read the book and it's all right. But she was so obsessed with it because she cared so much about what other people thought about her choices. That's really actually what stopped her from doing it. What are people going to say if I leave my job? What are people going to say? I remember at one FinCon where Trish came with me, I was wearing a shirt that was a little bit cropped and she's like, I can't believe you're letting people see a little bit of skin. What's going on, Bernadette? Right? And so I share that because that really threw me for a loop. At one point, you do this bargaining thing. You're like, I was saying to myself, what if I had actually just been a little bit more firm with her? So no, Trish, you're going to quit now. You're going to do this thing now. We're going to start this thing now. We're not going to wait another year. Would anything be different? Probably not. But I think the point of that and why I shared it at the summit was because so many of us keep waiting for things to fall into place. And especially for your audience where people feel like they're starting late. I'm going to say the opposite of what a lot of other coaches say is, oh, it's never too late and take your time. I'm like, no, actually start today because tomorrow is not promised. And if anything, I would rather you start something and be wrong about it than never have the opportunity to start it at all.
Yeah, I'm so sorry about your friend. I remember you sharing that story, and that must have been devastating. And it is a wake-up call. You have somebody so close to you that happens to, and just a reminder of all the things you just mentioned.
We once had a guest on the show that said, you know what? It's okay that you call us late starters, but the emphasis is on starter. Like it almost should be starter late. You may be late, but you need to be a starter. And the inspiration is important, but the perspiration needs to come after that. Ooh, I like that one. At any rate, we need to get to U and S, and then we'll finish with H. Because I want everybody to understand the power of your book. What's the U?
Yes. So the U in Crush is understand your net worth. So once you have at least you've cleaned up and you got all the crap out of your accounts and the things that you don't need. And then you think about, well, what would life look like in independence in R? Then U is understanding your net worth and knowing what each of your accounts are doing specifically and how you can best make them work for you. So common examples are like people who don't have a high yield savings account should get one. People who, most common thing I've been dealing with lately are people who are investing in their brokerage accounts when they have not invested in their IRAs. And it makes me crazy. Understanding your net worth. And then S is spending intentionally. It used to be spend unapologetically. And I found that people were taking that unapologetically part and using it as a reason to go buy things that they didn't really need. So it evolved into spend intentionally, which is budgeting, making sure that you actually know what's going in and out and really focusing on cash flow. And then H is heal your money wounds, which I thought was the kind of the most relevant topic that, I've been a long time listener of your podcast. And I know a lot of people talk about those kind of other elements. So I would love to chat more about the healing your money wounds part.
Okay, one more thing that I loved that I learned about you before we talk about H, which is the pithy place to end, is the $1 rule with regards to spend. I had never heard about this before, and this is a powerful concept. Tell us about those earrings you bought.
The dollar rule basically says that if something comes out to $1 per use, then go ahead and buy it. It's the opposite again of a lot of other frugal people, just like don't spend on things. It's actually, if it fits this, then don't feel guilt about it and just go ahead and buy it. So earrings, like actually this mic as a great example is just, this is a little bit more expensive than another mic, but I'm like, I use it every day. So it's going to meet the dollar rule, but it also works on things like couches. I like that I have all these things here. Like for example, this couch was more expensive. Could I get a couch at IKEA or whatever, but I chose to get that couch because if I'm going to keep it for 5 years, then it comes out to $1 per use. People tend to really love that rule because it actually gives you permission to spend on things, again, intentionally. And it actually also deters you from buying things that are just impulse purchases. Or for example, I'm not a big fan of fast fashion because even if a shirt is cheap, if it's just going to get messed up in the wash after a couple of washes, then I would rather you get a higher quality piece that's going to stand the test of time in your closet.
We need to apply the $80,000 card. Are we going to use a car 80,000 times in the course of its life with us? That's a great concept for thinking about spending. And I thought that was worth getting out there because in doing this for 3 years, I'd never heard of a rule like that. You invented that, right? And I think it's brilliant.
I love it. And people are going to have to hop on over to YouTube, take a look at Bernadette's cool purple mic and her whole office setup. So check us out. Just catch it up to 5 on YouTube because we love to have fun things so that people can actually watch us too. But I love seeing your whole setup there, Bernadette.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I appreciate that you shared that because the $1 rule actually stemmed from some of the money wounds I've had in the past.
Okay, that's what we're talking about now. H used to be hustle, hustle, but it changed as you changed. And tell us about the evolution of your H and why is it so important and the components of the H. I think there's 5 of them. Why is it so important for a late starter? Let's close with a bang.
Yeah. As I mentioned, when I was starting off the journey and I was paying off all of this student loan debt, the answer back then was hustle and actually hustle. I said it 3 times because that's how much I emphasized it. But I realized over time that was not sustainable. It just like that level of intensity is not sustainable. And now that I have officially retired, but even before I retired, I was working 20 hours a week. I know there's a lot of people on this who are listening to this and it's going to sound insensitive, but I can't imagine going back to working 40, 50-hour weeks like I used to before. Because now I look, even yesterday, one of my clients just, your skin looks so much clearer. Like you don't look bloated. Like you just look better. And I'm like, yeah, because I'm just not working like a dog right now. And the reason that I connect that with healing your money wounds is I realize that a lot of people think that the answer to their money problems is hustle, when I actually found out that with most of my clients, the answer to their money problems is finding out the underlying reasons why they feel like they don't have enough and what money scripts, as you said, do they have from family or experience or culture that is actually working against them. And I flipped that over to heal your money wounds. And then what was really fun about that was that I forgot that I had a psychology degree. It's been a long time since I've been to college. So I went back to go do some of the research that I did from my psychology degree and realized that so many of our challenges in money is really more about behavior and being honest with what we really think about money and income versus just trying to make more money.
Well, you're so right about the hustle part. I think we're part of this hustle culture. And we talk about financial independence, retire early. And I think they like to sort of claim, oh, if you're going to go for fire, you just, working yourself to death and things like that, or you're trying to move too fast to get to that independence. But that independence is part of the healing. And it's like, I don't want to be a part of the hustle and grind and all of that. It really does burn you out. So I love that you gave yourself the flexibility to change some of what each of these stand for as you evolved. And that's just how life is.
Components of H I really have found interesting too, because for you just said less is more. You said 20 hours a week can lead to more. It's not more equals more. More equals burnout. More is the rat race. And one of the components, or the first component of H now for you in healing, is the unsubscribe button. What is that? I don't have one of those.
Yeah, so it's both literal and figurative, right? So when I talk about the unsubscribe button, one of the things that I make my clients do from the beginning of their coaching with me is that we go through their emails and we start unsubscribing from things that are no longer serving us. For me recently, I've actually been having to do a lot of that because it's been fascinating. Because I just recently moved from Charlotte to Las Vegas, I have every day been unsubscribing from things that are local to Charlotte. And it only occurred to me now how no wonder I felt so pressured in Charlotte, because a lot of the things that I was subscribed to were all very hustly type of things in Charlotte. One of the exercises that anyone can do today who's listening to this is go into your email inbox and unsubscribe from 10 things that, whether it's like newsletters or especially like promotional things. Like we all sign up for the free t-shirt and now we're like forever subscribed to some company that we didn't really ask to be subscribed to. For me lately, I've had to unsubscribe from all of these notifications for concerts because I have been known to just buy concert tickets like on a fly, and unsubscribing literally, but also unsubscribing from kind of the general culture of more is more, actually less is more. And specifically for me, as someone who, as I mentioned to you, I started a fashion business as one of my first businesses. I still love fashion. I still love all of the things related to that industry, but do I need to have it hit me in the face every day? Probably not.
Yeah, unsubscribe is a philosophical thing. It's not just emails, it's subscriptions that don't serve you. It's saying no. It's saying no. I'm being contrarian. I'm not jonesing for this stuff. I'm unsubscribing. And that's what the FIRE movement does in a way. They're countercultural and not swept up by culture that sort of snowballs into this sort of media onslaught that causes you to, it piques your brain and one click into oblivion with credit card bills. The next thing that you talk about, which is also similar, is a screenless Sunday. Now, this is a real challenge for folks because Arthur Brooks says that we check our phones 205 times a day. Do you still practice this, or what's the purpose of this? And we can't be perfect, but what does this do for you? What is it and what does it do?
Yes. So I still practice it. I actually just did a Screenless Sunday this past Sunday. And so I grew up hella Catholic as a Filipino American. And so I actually remember back when I was growing up and I used to sing in the church choir, all of that, like very, very religious family. And what I do remember positively on Sundays was that basically from like the morning until mid-afternoon, like we were just hanging out with people. We were just connecting. We were not on phones. We actually were out in the community. And what I talk about in the book is challenging yourself. If you can't do it every Sunday, do it once a month or once a quarter, where you just take a Sunday and you literally lock your phone up somewhere that you cannot look at it. And you also take a break from the, what I call the medium and the big screen, right? So like your computer screen and your television. And turns out when you don't have those screens as an option, there's a lot of time in the day. And so Sundays for me have looked like going to the farmer's market and meal prepping and catching up on errands. AJ finally got our patio situated. It's a great time to just catch up on things that you've been meaning to do that you haven't gotten a chance to do. But also, alternatively, it doesn't have to be all about chores. Use Sundays as a day to go reconnect with your community. Actually go out in real life and intentionally go meet with people that you really want to meet. And for me, that has done so much for my mental health, because especially as someone who is doing a lot of content creation earlier in this business, like I was probably doing 500 times a day, if I'm being honest, like looking at my phone. And so it was amazing to me how the first couple of Screenless Sundays that I did, I would be reaching for my phone, like not even realizing that's what I was doing.
Yeah, I could practice more of that for sure.
Yeah, these things are great. One of the happiest times of my life was when I was 10 days in the Grand Canyon where there isn't a damn cell phone signal and you can't bring it with you anyway because it would fall into the river. And I've got to get back to this. I've got to detoxify. It's just like good sleep. And it's just like having times of the day, and you control your phone. It doesn't control you. Just like you control your money and flip your mindset, it doesn't control you. The other couple of things you talk about that I love and I need explained are the drama drain and the peace plan. This is important stuff for everybody, but maybe especially our late starters.
The best way I can sum up the drama drain is basically just stop hanging out with people who are drama. And so I got the biggest pushback from my publisher about the 5 habits in the Heal Your Money Wounds, because they were like, what does this have to do with personal finance? I'm like, everything. What do you mean? When I'm stressed out from stressful coworkers or stressful family members or friends who are like acting some type of way, I will absolutely go look for a dopamine hit and buy something off of Instagram, or I will have to spend more money on therapy. Like sometimes I would tell my therapist, I'm like, I would probably save money by just paying for my other friend's therapy instead of just talking to you about what people are doing. So the drama drain, there's a couple of like different like specific things to do in there. So for example, I'm sure we've all heard this before, but I have literally turned any meeting that can be an email, I make it an email. Like, for example, every day I get some kind of pitch from someone saying, hey, we think we'd be a great collaboration for you and your audience about this, whatever. Would you be open to a meeting? And my first question is always, can you be more specific about what you mean by a collaboration? And can you send me the information before we get on a meeting? And I have yet to have a single one that's turned into an actual meeting. That's one thing. But more recently, I've been having a lot of conversation. This goes back to specifically women of color. Like, we have been conditioned to just always say yes to things at the expense of our own mental health. And I was talking to a client this past week who she said, I was talking to my therapist and she said that I just need to learn how to have stronger boundaries. She described her work as Game of Thrones, like that kind of drama, like with the political and like just all of the office politics and stuff. And she said, I just need to learn how to have stronger boundaries. I said, or because I know your finances, we can just quit that job and then you don't need boundaries. How about you just leave this toxic situation that's causing the drama instead of trying to figure out how to have stronger boundaries and stay in the drama? I would love for people to read that section of the book because that one part of it seems to click the most with my clients, specifically women of color, because they're like, wait, that's an option. I can just exit the room that I don't like. Yes, you can actually.
Well, and that goes back to the people you have around you. You know, you were able to say that, but I know when I was working, I don't know if you felt this way, but when I was working, everybody that was there was in corporate America. No one was going to talk about anything different because that's what everyone was doing, but you're a different voice and you have a different perspective. But the one thing that you touched on briefly that I can't ignore is you talked about your retirement. And I just want to make sure we hear a little bit about that. And I think the word retirement, very similar to the word financial literacy, is almost misdefined, or the definition has changed and it's different for everybody. I'd like to hear, tell me about your retirement and how you look at retirement.
Yeah. And it goes in conjunction with the peace plan. So in the book, I talk about the peace plan, and it's basically having a conversation with your family about what finances look like and what expectations are, especially, again, so many people that I coach are in the sandwich generation who have kids and who also have to take care of elderly parents. And this is actually what inspired me to have my own retirement, was that my father didn't retire until his 70s. And it wasn't until he was in his late 70s that I learned that he loved to hike. And we grew up in New York City. So I was like, I don't remember my dad ever hiking. And then he moved to Las Vegas because, as I mentioned earlier, my parents could no longer afford to live in New York City. And they ended up deciding to retire in Las Vegas. And I remember saying to myself, my dad did not work this hard for 50 years just for me to also have to retire in my 70s and only start hiking in my 70s. I'm not doing that. Came up with the plan to retire in my 40s, ended up officially retiring shortly after my friend passed away. This is all coming full circle, all these stories. When my friend passed away, I said, I'm taking a sabbatical. And then the sabbatical turned into, let's just see if I can retire. And if I have to pull a Michael Jordan and come back after being bored or whatever, then I'll go do that. And so for me specifically, retirement means that I don't have to work. As in, my current investments cover my living expenses. And not just from pulling out of gains and pulling out of like the growth of my investments. Like, I have dividends coming in from my investments that are paying for my basic living expenses. Does it pay for all my BTS concerts? No. And I have yet to figure out that problem. But is my housing paid off for? Yes, because I paid for my house in cash. Is my car, do I have a car bill? No, because my car is paid off in full. And so the only living expenses I have are like my very annoying HOA right now, food, which has been a challenge because I live in Las Vegas and there's so many good buffets, health expenses, and like little miscellaneous things. But this is the first time in my life that I realized I don't have to work. Because even when I was working 20 hours a week and my business was thriving and I became a millionaire, like I still felt like the money wound of like, my worth is tied in what I do for a living. And right now I intellectually understand that I don't have to work, but has my heart caught up with that? No, not yet.
Oh, I totally agree. I totally resonate with that. You're in your 40s and you're in this bridge to the second chapter in a way, out of the hustle and, finding peace and giving back of your wisdom. I'm in that same bridge, but it's 20 years later. That's exactly how I feel, because the ultimate goal of quote unquote retirement is not necessarily to stop work, but maybe do work that's meaning where you don't. It gives you meaning where it doesn't provide you with the money that you need to live, but ultimately it's peace joy like Bernadette Joy. And there are so many more things in life to focus on because you've given of your time and life energy to create the nest egg that gives you the freedom and peace to look at the world differently and give back differently, not that you haven't before. So I really commend that. And I've seen you in transition. Literally, the Impact Summit impacted you in ways that led to your journey across the country. You stopped in Knoxville and we visited, so our friendship got to blossom there. But what's next?
To wrap up the heal your money wounds, but the last thing is like to find your community. That's actually what's next for me right now. Is I actually posted about this, and I think you might have commented on it, Bill, where a couple of days ago I just said, I'm being very transparent. I've been able to build a successful business. I've been able to retire early, but I feel like I still haven't found my in-person community. So much of my community has been online for the last couple of years, to Jackie's point of Zoom and and COVID and stuff. And so the next couple of months, at least for me, I don't think I can think even much farther than that, is going back to who Bernadette is outside of Crush Your Money Goals, who Bernadette is as a basic human being, and figuring out what did she really like to do and who does she really like to hang out with. And it turns out it's not very much different from 10-year-old Bernadette. I just like doing arts and crafts. I just like listening to music. I like going to dance class. I like exercising, and still unwinding the idea that I always have to be productive every day has honestly been quite a challenge. Immediately in the next couple of months, yesterday, I think this is timely, I like just put on Eventbrite randomly. I'm like, hey, does anyone in London or anyone in Brussels want to meet up for these BTS concerts? I don't know anyone in London. I don't know anyone in Brussels. And right before this, I got a message that 2 people signed up. And I was like, wow, like random friends in Brussels. Like, how fun is that? And I will say Plutus Impact Summit, coming full circle from the beginning of this conversation, made me realize how much I missed that and how much I needed that, but also that it takes a lot of effort to build real, genuine connection. And back then, I didn't have the mental energy or the physical energy to do that, but now I think I do.
That is fantastic. I have 2 letters to add to Crush then.
Okay.
Crush it. And I is identity. And T is together. Identity together. And we catch up to Phi together. Maybe you can, in your next iteration of your book, talk about it or something like that. Because that's how I feel. That's what I feel we've led to today. That's the ultimate goal. What's my identity and how do I do it together? Because that's where the value in the world, that's where joy, happiness, contentment really live. It's not in the money. It's in the journey, it's in the process, it's in the hard times, it's in the good times. And you really only grow sometimes from really tragedy. I mean, that tragedy really affected you and your growth along with the Impact Summit. So I've loved our conversation today. We've covered a lot of ground, but I think our community is going to get real value out of this because you're so human, so impactful, and you've helped me be a better person already in our interactions. So I encourage people to reach out to you after listening to this. Bernadette is a coach. Meet her up in Vegas. I want to out us a little bit because I think we're going to collaborate with Bernadette on maybe the first Catching Up to Phi meetup. And maybe Vegas is the right place because there's always a direct flight to Vegas from almost anywhere in the country. And it may be anti-money, but it'll be pro getting together because those are probably some of the cheapest direct flights at this point in our country. What do you think, Bernadette? Can we get this off the ground?
Sign me up. Yes. And also, I will challenge all of you as someone who lives here locally in Vegas now, is that there are still some pretty good deals. I will find all the good spots that we can go to that aren't overpriced. And sometimes I look at Vegas, like the Strip in particular, as a test for me. Like when I say what I say, like the kind of person I want to be, like I go there and I'm like, okay, this is just testing me to see if I really am who I said I was going to be. So I would love to have you guys in Vegas. And if anyone wants to connect with me, the best way is actually through my newsletter. It's crushyourmoneygoals.com/free guide. And for anyone who's listening today, I would love for you to check out the checklist of just all these resources that I think can be helpful as you approach retirement.
Great. We'll be sure to drop that in the show notes. And you know what I've found about Las Vegas is I tell everyone this because I went a few times and I actually love Las Vegas. If you don't gamble, Las Vegas is a cheap trip. They make all their money from the casinos and from gambling. So if you're not a gambler, you can get to Vegas and enjoy Vegas for really cheap. But Bernadette, this was a joy. I know you've heard every joke there is about joy, but it was a pleasure for both of us. I know you and Bill spent a lot of time together in preparing for the Plutus Talks. I got to know you better. I followed your work, heard you on plenty of podcasts, and you bring so much value and such a unique lens that we were so glad to bring to our audience. So for our audience, we want you to always remember, it is never too late to start. It's better late than never. And it's always the right time to catch up to FI together.
All right. See you next week on Catch Up to FI. Thank you, Bernadette.
So, Bill, as you know, we cannot do this show without our amazing staff and the people that help us put this on. And our editor is Fritz Brazard. We love them and they keep us going.
Yeah, Jackie, I mean, this show wouldn't have the quality it has without our folks, our peeps. And we'd also like to give you a few calls to action for the show. We love our community and we hope you love us back. If you would like to support the show and our mission to help late starters, you can do that at Buy Me a Coffee, which is a platform that allows you to make a donation. The link is in the show notes and on the website.
Check out the show notes for resources mentioned in today's show. Also, head on over to our website at catchinguptofi.com and check out our vetted resources, partners, and affiliates for discounts and their services because we love sharing great deals.
Please share the show with others and head on over to our Facebook community to help us grow. If you prefer video, head on over to YouTube and watch the show there. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Catching Up to FI. We would appreciate it if you could also leave us a 5-star review to help our message reach others.
And while we are financial educators that love to teach, remember that our content is for general education and information purposes only. We are not providing financial, legal, or tax advice. Always do your own research or consult a professional before making important decisions.
So, Jackie, we'll see our audience next time on Catching Up to FI. Cheers.